Released in 1992 for the Super Nintendo, Super Mario Kart would become the premier racing game on the system, with world tournaments endorsed by Nintendo still taking place to this day. Super Mario Kart quickly became the most popular racing game on the console, reaching over 8 million in sales and spawning a new racing franchise with the Mario IP. It's no surprise that a game this beloved would create intense competition, generating some of the longest-lasting records in speedrunning history. And that's what we're looking at today, the longest-lasting world records in Super Mario Kart. Before we get into the records, there are a few things you need to know. Tracks are divided by two criteria, fast laps or F laps and course laps, which are also known as 5 laps. There is a further divide based on the regional version runners play on, as there are differences between NTSC and PAL releases that warranted a split in records. Lastly, we'll be looking at a combination of the longest single standing records and the longest time a record has been held by a single person across different times lowering that record. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Alicia Kart7 Loest held the Mario Circuit 4 PAL F-Lap record 9 times in her career, first hitting a 19:06 on February 28, 2004, then lowering it to a 19 flat the next day, which happened to be a leap year. She would break the 19-second barrier on her next record, and this was the catalyst to her war with Karel KVD van Duivenboden that ran from 2004 through to 2007. KVD would lower the record 13 times to Kart 7's 5, but she claimed the final time with an 18:17 on November 28, 2007. This record went unbroken for almost 9 years. It was tied twice along the way, first by KVD, then by Scoob, and was beaten by Christian Crazy Wild under fantastic circumstances. Super Mario Kart has a once-a-year live championship tournament, the Championnat du Monde, and it would be at the 2016 edition that Crazy lowered the record, not just breaking a 3-way tie, but being one of only 3 people to set a world record at a live event. The most memorable track from Super Mario Kart also has a very interesting record history. Starting with Sammy Sutton's record sometime in the year 2000, it would take 4 years before Kart 7 broke the time. Starting in 2005, KVD would go on a rampage, setting 15 records between then and June 16, 2016, engaging in battles with various karters as he fought to remain on top. Eventually, Sammy would reclaim the record in 2012, where it stood for over 4 years before KVD tied it, meaning we have 2 interesting histories for this track. KVD has held the record for a total of 3,971 days, with his tie lasting for 1,655 ongoing days. Sammy, on the other hand, has held the record for a total of 4,512 days, with his ongoing tie with KVD having stood since February 17, 2012, for 3,238 days. Ghost Valley 1 on NTSC had a course record that stood for 8 years that was set in 1996 by Brian Gallo, before it was broken by Chris Balk in 2004. But this isn't the longest record on the track. Oliver Segura Gonzalez lays claim to the longest standing single record, having set it in April 28, 2011, ending the month-long reign of Anti-Star in the process. Oliver enjoyed a long span with the record, almost hitting the 9-year mark, before KVD beat him with a slight improvement early in 2020. Having held the record 2 other times prior to his longest reign, Oliver boasts 3,961 days with the Ghost Valley 1 NTSC course record in total, but that's nothing compared to the records to come. Guillaume Antistar Leviac would set the Koopa Beach 2 NTSC course record on January 7, 2011, marking his first time holding the record and breaking Canadian Chris Balk's almost 3-year reign. It wouldn't be the last improvement Antistar made, however, as over the next 2 days, he'd set 2 more times, arriving at a 53:16 on January 9th. He'd let this sit for the rest of the year until he came back in mid-December, where he set his final time, a 52:80, breaking what is likely the last second barrier on the track, and having a record that will last 10 years if it makes it through to the end of 2021. Laurent Neo has the prestige of holding this highly disputed record for almost a decade, when he set a time of 12:26 on Choco Island 2 for the NTSC F-Lab on October 11th, 2009. Prior to his record, the time had been lowered 39 times, and by 12 different runners. Neo would tie the record held by Kart 7 on September 19th, 2009, and just 2 days later, he would lower it by 0.03 of a second. It took just over 9 years, but it was dethroned by Scoob, who tied the record and then broke it later the same day, starting a war with Guillermo Firewaster Arantes, who currently has claim to the title, but for 3,360 days, Neo was untouchable. The Ghost Valley 3 PAL course record is approaching the 10-year mark and will achieve the decade status in 2021. Set by Sammy Sutton on May 8, 2011, it has an interesting history, as he set the first recorded time on the track back in 1999 with a 1:15.95. He'd lower it again in 2002 after it was taken by the legendary karter Michael MJ Jongeres, who had extensive success in Mario Kart 64. Through the mid-2000s, Gerard Rub Rudehorse would dominate the record for the next 2 years, until Kart 7 grabbed it with a 1:14.68. This is where things got interesting, as Sammy wouldn't take the record back until 2011, with a small improvement of 0.02 of a second. This means that he set records across 3 different decades, and if he lowers his time again now, it will likely be the first record lowered by the same person across 4 different decades. The specific date of this next record isn't precise, but it was set sometime in 1993, and could have been achieved as early as April of that year. Set by Japanese runner Junjioki, the time was driven when he was invited on television to showcase his abilities, which is why we have video proof of it today. He set a full course time of 58.93, making this the earliest record with proof in Super Mario Kart history, and a contender for one of the oldest speedrun records with video proof. Due to the scarcity of record tracking in this time period, it's hard to judge if Junji held the record for the entire 10 years, but his time is the best we have, and it wasn't officially beaten with any known records until 2003 by Martin Mussette. Lowered by KVD 11 times, he would hold the record for a total of 4,647 days before it was lowered for the final time on July 28, 2007, which stood for 3,649 days. Through his reign, he pushed the time through 3 different second barriers, breaking through 58 seconds with his 57.92 on August 29, 2004. The 57 with his 56.81 on February 26, 2006, and then pushing it through the 56 on September 22, 2006 with his 55.77. He'd approached the 55-second barrier in 2007 and then stopped with a 55.20, which stood unchallenged for just 4 days shy of 10 years. It would be beaten by Scoob on the same day as a rules change was implemented that allowed players to use wall hopping, allowing them to jump over walls under special conditions, which was previously allowed only in the shortcut records. The trick pushed the record well beyond the 55-second barrier, getting deep into the low 54s early in its release, where it has changed hands over a dozen times since, sitting at a 53.13 currently held by Jonathan Lafongo Toul Charignon. One of the few track specialists in Super Mario Kart, Tyler SportsGuy001 Worley has laid exclusive claim to the Koopa Beach 1 NTSC course record since he first set it in 2007. His first record ended a year to the day-long reign by Joe EOJ Bernier, who had pushed the record beyond the 47-second barrier with a huge PR of 0.4 seconds to improve on his previous record. Sports Guy would keep his record unchallenged and push the time below the next second milestone, achieving a 45.96 on October 9, 2007. He'd lower it 3 more times through to 2015, arriving at a 45.76 set on March 25, 2015. His longest single standing record is the 45.76, having stood for an ongoing 2,107 days, but his consecutive streak from 2007 stands at 5,049 ongoing days. This next record clocks in at 4,095 days, and it was set by none other than KVD on September 18th, 2009. Having first captured the Bowser Castle 3 NTSC course record early in 2006, where he broke into the 128 second barrier, he would battle for control with Firewaster, Kart 7, and Oliver Segura Gonzalez, until going on a streak of records in September of 2009. His first time was a low 127, beating his PR by 0.33, the current record by 0.12, and being just a few precious hundredths away from the last second barrier this track would see. With some intense sessions, he'd break the barrier 3 days later, cutting another 3/10 out of the record, blowing the barrier apart and arriving at a 1:26.76, but he wasn't done. Despite having dropped the record so far, KVD pushed one more record out in that month, and on September 18th, he'd arrive at what would be the longest standing single record in Super Mario Kart history, a 1:26.66. Aaron Langerak would tie the record 11 years later on November 19th, 2020, but it wouldn't stand tied for long, as KVD came back in early December to push it down to a 1:26.63, where it stands today. KVD lowered the record 7 times since he first took it on January 12, 2006, holding it for a total of 5,170 days that are still ongoing and breaking a second barrier twice. If you track the time from when he first captured the record in 2009, he's held it unbroken for 4,125 days since Aaron's time was a tie, and if you count his total time holding this record, 5,170 days, which is the stuff of legends. The Ghost Valley 1 NTSC F-Lap is one of the longest unbroken streaks in Super Mario Kart. Having held this record twice for a total of 20 days in 2005, KVD would set a record in early 2006 that would develop into a 15-year streak as he lowered the record 3 more times that year, taking it from an 1176 to an 1165. It stood here for 13 years before he returned to run attempts at the track again, and on February 10th, 2019, he'd shave off 2 more hundredths of a second, breaking his previous record that stood for 4,426 days. If you look at his first record back in 2006, KVD has held this for an ongoing 5,480 days consecutively. And if you add the previous 2 records, his total time with this is just over 5,500 days. The stuff of mythology. Before we get to the final record, here are some honorable mentions that had long total time streaks, but the longest single time a record stood didn't quite reach the threshold for inclusion on this list. KVD's longest standing record on its own was a tie he achieved on August 16, 2015 with Antistar, and has stood for 1,962 ongoing days. He's held it for a total of 4,817 ongoing days, and unless he lowers it, Antistar will maintain the longest consecutive record. Mario Circuit 1 PAL course has been held by Sammy Sutton for a total of 4,923 days starting in 2000. He lowered it 13 times, with his longest being the current record, set on December 25th, 2013. KVD yet again, his longest lasting record was set on August 2nd, 2015, and is ongoing at 1,976 days. He's lowered it 9 times, being interrupted 3 times since his first record in 2004, but his total time holding this record, 5,683 days. And now, on to the longest record in all of Mario Kart history. With only 3 people laying claim to the Rainbow Road PAL F-Lap in history, it's no surprise that it's the longest unbroken record held consecutively by the same person. Having set his first record on this track in 2004, KVD would lower it 3 more times before Kart 7 tied it in 2007, which only lasted a month before KVD lowered it again to break the tie. As the years passed, he lowered it 4 more times, with his longest single standing record being set on June 12, 2010, standing for 2,185 days before he lowered it again to a 1706 on June 5, 2016, which is where it stands today. While the longest single standing record he set on this track isn't close to some of the others, KVD's domination on this course is legendary, holding the record unbroken since 2004 for a total of 5,848 ongoing days. Hey guys, did you know that KVD has held every Bowser Castle 3 record almost exclusively since he started karting, or that Sammy has set records in the game every decade since its release? If you'd like to hear those stories, let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoy the content, check out my Twitter and Patreon page for the latest news and special updates. Until next time.